Good evening. Hello. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. We are on. We are live. I cannot wait to get this conversation started. So if you are on, please like, share, tag, post, send it to somebody in their inbox. Get ready to get started. Super excited about being on tonight. Hope you can hear me clearly. If you're on, go ahead and like, share, tag, send it to someone in their inbox. We'll get started real quick. We were a tad bit late tonight jumping on, but we are on and we are ready to get started. Hopefully, like I said, you guys can hear me and see me okay. I'm going to give it a few more seconds and then we're going to get started. Go ahead and like, share, tag. Go ahead and like and share. Tag. All right, we are going to go ahead and get started because I do not want to belabor the time on tonight. I am super elated tonight for my special guest that is coming on. And we're doing something a little bit out of the box on tonight, but I'm so excited to have her talk and to come on and to share with us some nuggets and some words of wisdom. She is a consultant. She is a director. She's a digital creator. She's not on right now, so I'm hyping her up real big. She's a digital creator. She's a wife. She's in ministry. She's a mom. You all know her as the CEO of TheSanctiflyChick. So I'm excited to have on family, my sister, Alyssa Cartwright Banks. I'm super excited to have her on tonight. And so we are doing something a little bit different tonight because Alyssa is my first guest that is on that has not gone through a divorce. Praise God.
Praise God. Praise God.
But you know what? I was really impressed of the Lord about maybe a month and a half ago to have her on just to talk about marriage and just some really key and important nuggets that she has learned along the way that can translate for to those who are married. And when me and her, the times that we have talked, a lot of our stories has paralleled with some of the things that we have gone through. Unfortunately, my marriage ended, in divorce, but I really want to bring her on because something that she has said to me that's been very key is the ability to make a decision, right? The ability to make a decision in that covenant. And there was a period of time, and I know she's going to share a little bit of her story, her marriage story. There was a period of time where she and her husband considered getting a divorce, but because of a decision that they made, we are here. And she has been such an inspiration and example, just watching her and seeing the love that she and her husband share and all the nuggets that she drops all the time. I'm a huge fan because I believe that love is a beautiful thing because God is love. He created us to love. He created us to have someone to love, to share our lives with. And so, again, I just wanted to bring her on tonight, a little bit of a twist, but I believe that she has some things to share that are very important. So listen, we're gonna jump right in it, like how we usually do. We are conversing on the phone, but you
Yeah.
put a post about a month or so ago that was really triggering for me. And me and you spoke about this, and it was the idea of marriage being a covenant between two people, right? And that
Yeah.
it is not a group decision.
Yeah.
And very specifically, your post talked about marrying him or marrying her does not mean that you are marrying the family, although you are marrying into a family, and the
Yeah.
family can be an integral part of the relationship. They're there for support, for guidance, whatever, but going into marriage, you have to understand that your covenant is between that person.
Oh
And the
yeah.
Bible says it very clearly that the two people, the man and the woman, the two people
Two.
are coming together to become one, right? It's not
Mm-hmm.
my mama, me, my mama, and my wife, or me and my dad and my husband. It's the two individuals. And so, speaking from a divorce perspective, and having talked to people that have been divorced, a lot of times family dynamic, right?
Yeah.
In-laws, sisters, brothers, cousins, uncles, the whole
Yeah.
gamut, sometimes can play a part in the dissolve of a marriage, because instead of there just being two people, right, walking this journey, trying to figure each other out, trying to figure out how to merge their singleness to become
Yeah.
oneness, you have outside influences. And if not careful, those outside influences can take over the marriage, right?
Yeah.
And then it's not just me and you, it's me and you and everybody else that has been brought,
Everybody else.
right,
Everybody else. Yeah.
that has been brought into the marriage. And a lot of times that becomes very unhealthy,
Very.
especially if the outside parties have a level of dysfunction or negativity or toxicity or whatever. People have their own preconceived notions, and sometimes they will deposit that into you. And then the next thing you know, you looking at your spouse side eyed, when it's
Yeah.
supposed when it's supposed to be you two coming together. So
Absolutely.
talk to me. I know me and you have talked a lot about this offline, especially with your story and kind of how that played out in your marriage and how that was, definitely a difficult time for you.
Absolutely. Um, so for me, it was, I think, in our defense, we got married fairly young.
Mm-hmm.
So when I got married, I think I had just turned 24. I mean, like when I say just turned 24, I think I turned 24 like 3 weeks before we got married.
Wow.
So I was 24. What
Mm-hmm.
24-year-olds? I think he was 25. He was turning 26 on our honeymoon, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So we were young. That's
Mm-hmm.
the beginning of this is we were young.
Mm-hmm.
So I think one of the things that happened in our marriage is because we were so young, a lot of people, that was everybody that was around us, gave a lot of advice.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes that advice wasn't given in a way that it was advice. It was
Mm-hmm.
almost like a directive.
Wow.
And because we didn't have certain boundaries set up, we
Mm-hmm.
hadn't talked and discussed, okay, what's not okay.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it started to wear on our marriage
Wow.
heavily. like heavily weigh on our marriage. And the time that you're talking about, because I wanted to give brief for how young we were, is that because always when I say talking about my marriage now, I'm 33, and people are always like, oh, marriage. And they come to me talking about marriage, and I'm like, guys, I actually been married for almost 10 years. So it's like, I'm not really new to this.
Right.
I'm true to this. So
Right.
I am just considering, we were young, we got married. It was all of these advice, and we had to learn how to eat the fish and spit out the bone.
Wow.
Eat the fish and spit out the bone. And that was concerning everybody. My parents, of course, will be married for 50 years this year. And to God be the glory, because that's a long time.
Right.
But their advice to me was always fix things in your marriage.
Wow.
The two of you. I think you and I were talking earlier, and I was like, I can call my mom right now and be like, oh my gosh, Kendall, blah, blah, blah. I could go on. And she'd be like, okay, and go talk to your husband.
Right.
And that's it. Like, that's not it. She'll be like, I'm praying for you. That's it. But she's not going to interfere at all. So I think a huge part of our marriage was we didn't set boundaries. And those boundaries are different for everybody. Some things I'm comfortable with, he's not comfortable with. Some things he's comfortable with, I'm like, ew, I don't know about that. Or like even things that you discuss with other people. Some things we had to learn to really buckle down and talk to each other. Because the point in our marriage where everything really came to a head was in the first 5 years of our marriage. Somebody had said to me, between years 5 and 7, they're the hardest years of your marriage. And, being young, I'm like, girl, whatever.
Right.
Whatever. A month shy of our 5th anniversary, randomly, my husband, well, I'll go back a little further. Probably a couple weeks before that, I heard Holy Spirit very clearly, quit your job. And at the time I was a college professor. So I'm like, what do you mean quit my job? To do what? Quit your job. And I'm like, all right, okay, that's weird. But I heard it, went to Kendall and was like, God told me to quit my job. And he was like, I know you don't lie about God. So if he said it, all right, cool. That was September 4th. September 14th, I believe it was. It was a hurricane. And now how this is set up, in hindsight, I'm like, God, you were setting us up for something. I didn't know what you were doing though. September 14th, it's a hurricane coming to North Carolina. So I'm like, let's just go to my parents' house so that we can just kind of relax, like get away from it. Go to my parents' house. We skip the hurricane. My husband is coming down the stairs. He slips. Now, my husband has played football since he was probably like 8. He went to college for football, all of that. Never had any major injuries. Coming down the steps, my parents have a big house. Coming down the last 3 steps, he trips over the next to the last step and lands. And when he lands, I'm in the kitchen chilling. I think I was talking to one of my mentees. And my mom comes in. I see her face, and I'm like, why are you looking at me like that? She's like, Kendall fell down the steps. And me, I chuckle. I'm like, Lord, what in the world? And I could tell by her face that it was like, something weird. So I said, okay, all right, what? And she was like, I think you need to come see him. So I come out there, and he's literally over the floor on his back. And I'm like, did you pass out? Like, what's wrong? Whatever. And he's like, my leg. I can't move my leg. Like, what is wrong with your leg? Long story short, he tore his quad. And I don't mean like a minor tear. This man tore his quad like it was like a 98% tear. Coming down the stairs, just randomly. The way he landed, I guess when he caught himself, he did that. So, of course, God told me to quit my job. So I knew then it was to be a caretaker, because when you tear your quad, that's your leg. You can't move.
Right.
So I had to do everything for him. But it was in those months of that recovery. It was a long recovery. He was only supposed to be out for 6 weeks. He ended up being out for 20. We never lost anything, praise God. But what it did to our marriage was it shook up everything that we thought we were creating. everything
Wow.
we thought we were creating. And you put a man in a position where he cannot provide.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say everything came to the surface, everything came to the surface.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like we just couldn't like mesh. Like we couldn't work together. It was like there was tension for
Mm-hmm.
months. And I'm like, I don't get it. This is different than who he is. I don't understand what's happening. And we sat down, and that was the conversation that I had posted about. We sat down and I said, we're gonna have to make a choice.
Mm-hmm.
We're either going to stay married and work at this, or we need to go our separate ways. So we honestly sat at the kitchen table that night and started talking about what divorce looked like.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very frank conversation. Okay, am I moving back home to Maryland? I don't want to go back home, but I will, because I realize that I need help. I'm going to be embarrassed. Like, okay, but I'm just like, okay, I'm just going to do it. And it was from that point in our marriage. At the time, I was still a little shaky about my decision. I'll be honest.
Mm-hmm.
Because my
Yeah.
decision was like, first of all, I ain't get married to do this. Like,
Right.
I didn't get married to do this whole, we going to have to work this out. And I ain't do all that. Because, you know, when you're thinking of marriage, especially in a church, like I felt like God owed me.
Right. For
Because,
sure.
you know, I had done right. Like I
Mm-hmm.
had done my stuff. Like I had waited until marriage to have sex.
Mm-hmm.
I had done all of
Mm-hmm.
this. And then it was kind of like,
Mm-hmm.
God was like, okay, you being a little arrogant a little bit. You
Mm-hmm.
think that you don't have to go through just because? And it was in
Mm-hmm.
that moment that everything that we were suppressing and that we were kind of like pushing to the side, but we literally had to sit down and work through. And one of those was boundaries. And that came boundaries with in-laws, boundaries with our circles, what I just
Mm-hmm.
wasn't going to talk to people about. And I
Right.
think that's important when you're married. It everybody's going to have lows.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's going to have lows. You're going to have points in your marriage where you're going to be like, all right, I'm out. If you don't, then you lying. Like, you lying. Don't say like don't. We're not gonna sit here and act like I never wanted to be like, yeah, I can be single again.
Right.
No,
Right.
but it came a point in our marriage. It was just like we got to make a decision, and when we started to make that decision, it's every day. I realized that in order to have a healthy marriage, you have to make that same decision every day.
Right.
It's the same
Well,
decision every day.
talk a little bit about this idea of boundaries, right?
Yeah.
Because it's so important, especially, when you're coming together and you're merging two families, how a person grew up plays
Mm-hmm.
a large part in how they conduct themselves in a
Yeah.
marriage, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whatever they saw their parents do, a lot of times, unfortunately, they bring that into a marriage, how they interact with their siblings, if
Yes.
there are things in their life that is unhealed, if there
Mm-hmm.
was trauma, if there was any type of abuse, whether it was verbal or physical, whatever they saw is how they bring into a marriage.
Operate.
So that conversation about boundaries is so important because there are a lot of people, like I forestated, that have gotten divorced that maybe could have worked things out, maybe could have gotten to the point of making this decision to stay
Yeah.
if there weren't so many negative influences
Mm-hmm.
speaking to them. And I think that, you know, people have to understand what their role is, especially when two people are getting married. And that
Yeah.
is, and I speak from my own experience, that sometimes that's hard for people to understand what their role is. Like, that's great that you were the mom. Like, that's great that you were the sister. That's great that you Auntie Pookie and whoever. But
Yeah.
like, when the person gets married, then their responsibility is now to this person.
To this person.
Their priority, not only their responsibility, but their priority is supposed to be to the person that they marry. And guess what? If this person is my priority, then I don't really have time to entertain
I
what
don't.
you think or feel about. Um, I know me and you talked about this earlier when we were talking, and I said that, for me, I'm the oldest. I have two younger brothers. Our mom passed away 16 years ago. And so, in the past 16 years, both of my brothers have gotten married. And so when my mom died, I understood, my role as I'm the big sister, well, I was always the big sister, but,
Right.
kind of stepping in somewhat to try to, protect them and
Fill
look
that
out
gap.
for them and kind of be not their mom, because we were like in our 20s when our mom passed, but just, that the woman in the
Yeah.
family,
Yeah.
And so,
I got you.
but I had a clear understanding, and I have a clear understanding of what my role is as their sister, now that my brothers, they're married men. You understand what I'm
Yeah.
saying? And so there is no part of me that has a desire to intrude into their business, right? Number one, they're grown. We can really start and stop there.
Right. We can start and stop there. That could be the end of the discussion, but it's not
Right.
always.
Right. But also the fact that they have a wife. And so,
Mhm.
whereas I'm the sister, right? And no one can take my place. I'm gonna always be the sister,
Right.
but I understand, and there's no competition there. Like,
Yeah.
those are my sisters now. And so I know, just from experience and from things I've heard from other people, that sometimes people get intimidated, especially if it's maybe a mom or a sister or aunt type of situation. They may be intimidated when another woman comes in, and they may feel like this woman has more influence on,
Yeah.
the man, or whatever the case may be. Sometimes people don't understand boundaries, and they don't understand what their role is now.
Absolutely.
Maybe you were the person that they came to talk to about their issues and problems, but you said something really key. You said that your mom, even now, if you go and talk to her, your mom says, nope, you need to call your husband.
Yeah.
Because, and I'm, speaking for her, she
Right.
understands that, yes, I'm your
Yeah.
mother, but you're a married woman. And so that situation,
It's
circumstance,
different. It's
is
different.
whatever it is, that is something that you need to work out with your spouse. So, like, how do you come to that place? Because it has to be a mutual decision,
It has to be a mutual decision. And it's hard. I'll be
Right.
honest, it's hard. And especially for me, it was hard because my husband and I are from two entirely different places.
Mm-hmm.
So when I came into the picture, I came to where he was.
Mm-hmm.
Not intentionally. I came to school and we just happened to meet and I stayed. But so I was coming to where he was. So it was different and it was hard for me because I was like the alien.
Mm.
So I was coming in like everybody's like, who is this girl?
Mm-hmm.
Who is this girl that has his attention? She's now like his priority. He's doing things like, wait, who is she? And everybody was like, whoa, 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 what's going on? And
Mm-hmm.
that was literally everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm talking about what are now my in-laws church, because I mean he grew up in the same church that we've been in, that we now both attend since he was 13.
Wow.
So I'm coming in as this college girl, like, I'm from up north. So he's like, everybody's like, whoa, whoa, who are you? And what are you
Right.
doing? So for us, we didn't start to do that until it was like that 5-year range. We
Wow.
started to set boundaries. And I think that was, if I could have gone back and done anything when we first got married, it would have been to establish those boundaries from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like there was an unnecessary weight on me to prove myself from
Yeah.
the
Now
jump.
that's good.
From the
That's good.
jump, like it was like nobody really cared that like
Mm-hmm.
what he was doing. It was,
Mm-hmm.
Alyssa, you have to prove yourself that you're good enough to be
Yeah.
the wife.
Right.
That you're the one who's maturing. That it wasn't even about him at all.
Listen, sing
At
my
all.
song, because I love what you just said, that there can be this intense pressure,
It
especially
was
if
pressure
you are the person coming in, right?
into
Because they've already established their life, their clique, their family,
who they thought
and
he could marry. I mean,
right,
realistically, the type of girl that they thought he would marry.
and even who they think the person is. And
Yeah.
what I've often said to people is, whether it's your son, niece, daughter, whoever, that person, while you may know them, you
You
don't
don't
know them
know them.
married. You
You don't
don't know
know
them
them.
married, because that's a
Yeah.
whole totally different relationship. That's a whole
Mhm.
totally different dynamic. That's a
Whole
whole
totally
totally
different.
different
And then I think it was our age
interaction. Yeah.
because there was this gap. Like he went away to school, so he technically went away to school. So he was like 2 hours away from home. So I'm like, from the time he graduated from high school to the time that we actively started dating, he had been gone since he was 18. A lot had happened. So I'm learning, Kendall, in this, he's an adult.
Mm-hmm.
In their mind, they're like, he's still 13.
Wow.
And I'm like, wait, what? What are you talking about? No, we don't do like, no, he doesn't really do that. And they're like, oh, well, how do you know? And I'm like, because that's my husband. Like, or before it was like, because I know my husband. Like, but it was this dynamic. And I tell people all the time, it was the same way with me. Of course, I come from a large family. And I come from a large family. So the problem that Kendall had to ran into was that I was everybody's baby. So, and from my family, there's some of them probably on here, maybe or maybe not. From my family, the standpoint was I was everybody's baby. So he had to tread lightly. He needed to tread lightly because I was everybody's baby. And then on the other side, like I said, he was like this golden child on his side. So we were both coming into it having to establish boundaries. And that's the one thing that I would say is like, if you're going to be in a marriage, you need to be in a marriage.
Yeah.
Like, be in the marriage. You make decisions together. You have conversations together. You do things together. And that is literally our premise. We operating in this together. And we're blocking out all of the negative noise. I don't care who you are. Anybody will tell you that. Like my parents, I love them dearly. But when it comes to me and Kendall, it is me and Kendall. That's it. Like, I don't care who you are. It's me and Kendall.
But that's a level of maturity, though. That's a level
It
of
came with,
understanding.
and
Yeah.
it came with, and I will say it did not come lightly. It was when we were in that spell where I was like, I'm about to lose my marriage. And what made me even more upset is I was about to lose my marriage and it wasn't even our fault.
Wow.
It wasn't even us. Like it was outside forces. Like it wasn't even us that was the problem per se. It was like I felt like we were in a situation, it was getting out of control and we didn't know what to do. So our marriage was about to end because we hadn't set boundaries from people that we're not married to. Like we weren't married to them. So that's the part that really started to like mess with my head because I understood how people could get divorced and still love each other.
Yeah.
Because I was like, bruh, I feel like I really do love him. And I really feel like he is my husband. But now I feel like we're about to divorce because there's so many outside forces. I don't even know what to do with that. Now, granted, his injury brought it to the surface and he made the decision to do that. And I feel like that's what saved our marriage because he made it. Not just, it wasn't just, he made the decision to say, okay, you know what? We're going to work at this. I'm gonna do this, and I know it's gonna take a while because there were some things that happened early in our marriage that I wasn't protected. And again, just in case anybody's messy, I've already discussed this with my husband. I'm very clear. He knows exactly what I'm gonna say.
Shout out to Kendall. Shout out to Kendall.
But early on in our marriage, a lot of things happened, and I wasn't protected by him. A lot of boundaries were crossed, and he didn't come to my defense. Because it was normal. Like, you know what I mean? it was
Yes.
like, what am I supposed to do? So he didn't know what to do. So it was kind of like, I'm gonna just brush this under the rug. You know, she's a strong woman. So it was almost like he took my strength for granted because he was like, she'll recover. But after years of doing that, like I was struggling. I was struggling.
Well,
Like,
that starts to, it definitely starts to weigh on you because you made a good point earlier by saying there's this unnecessary pressure, right? Especially if you are the person coming in to an environment that is exclusively the other person, right? So
yeah,
I understand that. Like I moved away because I was in grad school and I stayed there. So it's different when you
yeah,
are in that person's environment because then you have to try to navigate that space, right? You have to
yeah,
navigate that space. You're trying to build relationships with people that are in that family. And sometimes you do have that unnecessary pressure. Like marriage itself is going to come with its own challenges, right? It's going to come with its own challenges. It's going to come with its
yeah,
own situations and circumstances. And then on top of that, when you have family dynamic, and if it's not your family, how do you navigate that space? And you said something, you said early on in the marriage that you weren't protected because what you mean, this is how my family operate. But
right,
how your
right,
family operating is killing our marriage.
yeah.
So we got to make a decision.
We
Either
gotta make
you're going to
decisions.
let the family destroy the marriage, or are you going
Yeah,
to, like you said, put boundaries? And I love the fact that you said because you guys had to mutually come to a decision. And I always tell people that in a marriage, especially when you're looking at it from a perspective of being divorced, it's not going to work unless both
both of
people
you.
are committed. Both people have to be committed. Both people have to make the decision that, guess what, maybe
Yeah,
this is how it's been done, maybe this is a generational thing, but I cannot allow this negativity, this toxicity, this dysfunction to now
yeah,
bleed into what I thought, or what I hope God put together.
yeah.
So I think
I think that's key. And
that's
I
so
do want
key.
to say that I think that these are boundaries that every marriage has to put in place. Whether you come from a great family or you come from a family that has some trauma, whatever it is, you have to do that. So I do want that to be clear. I'm not,
Right,
I am not having a conversation talking about my in-laws like they're such horrible people. That's not it. It's just a
right.
matter of we both had to have some adjustments. Like I get that that's how your family worked, but that's not us. Because I was coming from the
Mhm.
other side of it, and again, my parents have been married for almost 50 years. But there were expectations that I was putting on my husband like he was my dad.
Right.
And it's like
That's good.
he's not a 60-year-old man. Like, so there is some growth that he has to have. There's some growing
Mhm.
up that he has to do, some maturing as a man that he has to do. But for me coming in it, I'm daddy's little girl. So I'm coming in it with these expectations, like you supposed to do. And he's like, I don't got it like that yet. What you mean?
Mhm.
So it's
Right.
both sides. It's literally you
Yeah.
both coming to the conclusion of, okay, I understand how our families work, but I also understand what we're trying to do. And I think I shared
Mhm.
this scripture with you earlier. We always say the scripture, how can two walk together except they agree? But there is the Christian, I think it's the Christian Standard Version or the Christian English version, something. It says, how can two walk together except they agree to do so? And I think that
Mhm.
changes the dynamic of that scripture because it's not just we're both
Yeah.
saved, we both love God, and we like each other. So now our marriage is going to flourish. That's not it. It's more so we
Mhm.
are agreeing to wake up every day and to choose each other. And by choosing each other, that's
Mhm.
whatever that means. That's whatever that means.
Right.
And that's
Mhm.
it's not an easy place to get to. And when I'm saying this, because I know
Mhm.
I am not my divorce and I haven't been divorced, thank God.
Mhm.
But I'm like,
Mhm.
the reality of it is our low place could have very well been our ending. It could have very
Correct.
well been the end.
Correct.
Like I'm not some special person um that I get like a golden star because, we made it
Right.
through and somebody else had to divorce. That's never how I carry this, but I share my story because I'm like, look, you can recover, but it takes work to recover.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's going to take some work
Right.
to
For
recover.
sure.
Like there is some forgiving that has to happen. There are some boundaries that have
Mm-hmm.
to be set, and it has to be, I don't care what anybody else does. What happens in my
Mm-hmm.
marriage, we will figure it out together. That's it. Like we'll
Mm-hmm.
figure it out together.
Yeah. I love me and you have talked to transition a little bit because you said this quite a few times about the challenges, right? That come in a marriage. And all marriages face challenges. We'll use that word.
Yeah.
But talk a little bit about, when you say your vows for better or for worse, right? What does, because me and you have talked about this, right? This idea of what worse really is, right? Because me and you, although I'm some years older than you, we're in the same kind of generation. There is there is this generation before us who believe that um a difference in what worse is, right?
Yeah.
And me and you have talked about, okay, how can we come through this difficult time? But there's a difference between, this is my down period, my husband's out
Yeah.
of work or the financial hardship. There's a difference between going through those kinds of hardships and going through a situation where there may be verbal abuse or emotional abuse
Yeah.
and mental abuse and um physical abuse, or what, that kind of thing. And I think
Yeah.
that there's this idea, because you just said it, that, listen, I don't get a gold star because my marriage worked, because we overcame that dark period because it
Yeah.
was a decision that we both made. But there is this idea that if you have
It's
gotten
not gonna stay
divorced,
forever.
if there was some, right, that either you didn't try hard enough, or guess
Hmm.
what, you should have stayed in the struggle. And
Right.
most of the time when people say that, it's not this idea of the challenge that you go through, because at the end of the day, marriage is going to be a challenge because it's two people,
Two people
individual people with their own ideas and thoughts and background and family, and they have to merge those things
merge
together,
together.
right?
Merge them together.
to become to become one. Like, you don't become one on the day
And
of
I
the wedding,
think that's
right?
the
It's
part
like
of
a
that
process.
scripture that we miss. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
become
Mm-hmm.
one. It
Mm-hmm.
did not say you were gonna
Right.
get married and you were gonna be one. Like you have to
Mm-hmm.
become one, and that's a lot. That's a
Mm-hmm.
whole lot. And to touch on your point of that, how do you know when it's a down and when it's over? Because that's the reality of it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I feel like it goes along the same lines of when somebody asks you, how did you know it was the person you're supposed to marry? And you're like, you just know. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think that God ever will have us out here looking stupid.
Mm-hmm.
That's the reality of it. God will not have us out here
Mm-hmm.
looking stupid. So if we are in a situation, we have to make a very, we have to kind of assess the situation and say,
Mm-hmm.
okay, God won't give me more than I can bear, right? So either God didn't give it to me or I'm not handling it well. One of the two.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a hard place to come to the reality of, because both
Yeah.
of those places hurt. If I'm
Mm-hmm.
in a marriage that I wasn't supposed to be in, that's hurt. If I'm in a marriage that I'm supposed to
Mm-hmm.
be in, but I have to change, that's still hurt. Like both places are hurtful.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to really understand where you are and be truthful. And
Mm-hmm.
I think the difference between those is if you are able to communicate.
Mm-hmm.
And that's simply it. I didn't say that you were able to have the answers. I didn't say that
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be smooth sailing. If you are not
Mm-hmm.
able to communicate with each other, you might want to go talk to somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the bottom line. Because I feel like a lot of times that's what shifts it from this is just a down period to we're over.
Mm-hmm.
If we can't communicate, and Kendall and I try to be really, really big on communication. And I
Yeah.
think a part of marriages too is when we were in therapy, it's crazy because we were in therapy and our therapist is talking, and I'm like, she's nailing this to a T. She talked about how you go in cycles. And we sat down, and it was the most amazing thing. We sat down, and she told us both to write down, like, what made us feel the most like disrespected or something. And then how did we respond when we felt that way? And you would not believe that we were in two different settings when we did this. And when it came together, our cycles literally lined up. If I didn't feel heard, I disrespected him. And if he felt disrespected, he didn't hear me. So she's like, wherever you end up in the cycle, you're just going to keep going. That's literally what's going to happen. It doesn't matter if you disrespect him or you feel like whatever it is, you're going to end up there and you're going to keep going around here. So she's like, are you willing to break the cycle? Are you willing to break the cycle? And for us, that was hard. That was a hard thing because in order to break the cycle, it made us communicate in the middle of everything that was happening. So in that moment, when I was being real smart mouth, because that's just my nature, I felt like I wasn't being heard. In that moment, he would have to stop and say, Alyssa, we're in the cycle. And it would stop me dead in my tracks. Because it was at that I felt convicted. So that's why I'm like, I feel like communication is the way to break the cycle. And for a lot of us, and we'll be honest, we're Black women. A lot of us, we're not taught to communicate how we feel. So what do we do? Especially in the church. What do we do? When we are dealt with wrongly, when we are verbally abused, when somebody literally does us wrong, what are we taught? You pray over it and you keep going. And that's it. And we take that into marriage. So we don't even talk to our husbands about it. Like we aren't taught to communicate. So I'm like, yeah, if you can learn to communicate, some marriages would be saved. But again, like you said, it takes two people to communicate. Like I can't talk to a brick wall.
Right.
So at some point, you got to have some guidance. And I think a lot of that too, the other side of that is learning to communicate, but also communicating with people who can counsel you wisely.
Right. Because yeah. So you were going right where I was getting ready to ask you, because on the flip side, like we started in the beginning talking about the boundaries, right? And how it's important that you may have to keep certain people out of your marriage just because of whatever they are saying to you. But I know that you have shared with me in the past that during that low period in your life, with you and Kendall, when divorce was literally on the table, you had to come together with good counsel and people that could speak to the both of you, and to surround yourself with people that could speak life to you all individually and life to you together. And I think it's important to have discernment, right? On who can speak to you, because there are some people out here giving advice because they feel like, well, I've been married 40 years or I've been married 30 years.
You're not happily married.
But you're not happily married, and you kind of like,
we don't want to hear that.
You should just not be giving people advice. I mean, because being married 40 years and 50 years, like sometimes people just marry because where else you gonna go? For real. I mean, and you 70 at this. So I think it's important. I think it's important to really let God show you who has the ability
Yeah.
to speak to your specific circumstance, to speak to, where you are at, in your relationship to help you.
Yeah. And I think it's important too, is like you said, you got to have counsel with people that you aspire to be like. Um, I think a lot of times I had posted something earlier this week and I talked about how some of our friendships, we're friends with people out of vicinity, not out of honor. And I
That's
think
good.
that also comes with counsel too. Sometimes we
Yeah.
think that because people are in our vicinity, that they're just automatically supposed to be the people we talk to about marriage. And that's not necessarily true. We were fortunate enough that our marriage mentors uh were good friends of ours, but they were very honest and they knew us. So it
Mm.
was somebody that could say to me if I came and was like, because I'm gonna do da 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 da, and she'd be like, Alyssa, get out your feelings. Get
Right.
out your feelings. And I need you to calm yourself down. And when you're ready to talk, we can talk through this reasonably. Right now, you're not hearing anything I'm saying.
Mm.
I could take it because she knew me well enough to know I had already shut down. I had already made up in my mind what I was doing. And she's like, there's no point in me talking to you. But having
Wow.
relationship with people, it helps you to understand that because she could be like, go calm down, call me tomorrow, and let's
Hmm.
talk about this again tomorrow. So
Right.
even with that wise counsel, it comes with people that know you.
Hmm.
And a
Yeah.
lot of times we sometimes people are against, people that are single, talking to them about your marriage. And I agree with that to an extent. But I also think that there are single people who knew you before marriage who can also tell you, even if I don't go into detail, they
Hmm.
can tell you're in your feelings.
Hmm.
You might want to rethink that.
Yeah.
So just being around people that are going to tell you the truth. They're not going to
And it's
sugarcoat it.
Yeah, it's important to know too, when we talk about sound counsel, it's important to understand that it's also good to have unbiased counsel too as
Unbiased.
well.
That ain't
Because there are
you
right,
ain't got no skin in the game. You don't care.
right.
Like,
And at the end of the day, right, maturity understands, because for me, you know, all my life I've kind of been a person that people can come to talk to.
mm-hmm.
Maybe a part of it is because at the end of the day, I'ma just put it in this bag that's like, I don't care, because that's their business type situation.
Yeah.
Not that I don't care about the situation, but like I'm not,
But it's not my load to carry.
right, it's not my load. And I am mature enough to know that sometimes people just need a sounding board for just a minute. They
That's
need
it.
to they need to be able to say what they want to say unfiltered, and they know, Nakia is not going to disperse that information to anybody else.
Yeah.
And whatever I say to her, she's going to hold it and then she dumping it later. So
Right.
I think it's important to have people in your life that aren't going to play both sides of the fence. And that's
Yeah.
with
'Cause that's
that's with
dangerous.
any relation, that's any relationship that in your life. Because for me, I have learned the very hard way that people that straddle the fence, there's
Mm-hmm.
no loyalty there, because
There's no
they're going to roll with whatever conversation suits their mood at that particular time. And so not just
absolutely.
having that sound counsel, that the people that know you, that can speak to you in a way, that okay, this person, okay, she checked me, but she checked me for my good. Let me
For
calm
my good.
myself down and
Let me
come back.
right.
Right. And
And let me come back
reevaluate.
when I'm at a
Right.
place that I can
Because
receive it. And then
everybody,
I can even hear. Everybody can't make me do that.
Right. And everybody, I think you posted this a while back. You said that as much as you want to believe, everybody is not in your corner. And I think that goes back to what you were talking about, that just because they're in your proximity doesn't mean that they are the voice that should be
The
speaking
voice
into
that's
your
supposed to
life.
carry you through the season. That ain't it.
Right, exactly.
That ain't
And
it.
I
'Cause
think a lot of times
what
yeah.
I've learned in the last like 2 years of my life is that I have been connected with people that I ain't never thought in my life that you would at all be speaking to any point in my life. Um,
Mhm.
but God has a way of doing that. He
Yeah.
has a way of absolutely positioning people in your corner that can help you and that can kind of maneuver you through seasons. And I
Mhm.
think one of the things that is important is I'm an advocate for, if you are a good friend, you'll be a good spouse.
Mhm.
And that's just, if you're a good friend, you'll be a good spouse. And by good
Mhm.
friend, I mean, if you have healthy friendships, you have a
Mhm.
healthy marriage too. Because all marriage does is
Mhm.
accentuate who you already are. It just
Mm.
accentuates who you already are.
Wow, that's
So
good.
because I found that issues I was fixing in my marriage, I also needed to fix in my friendships. Like I also
Mm.
needed, like
Wow.
if I needed to communicate with my husband better, I realized that I was also a poor communicator as a friend.
Mhm.
If I needed to settle myself to hear what my husband was saying before I responded, we have this thing now where we say we listen to hear, not to respond. And a problem
Mm.
that was me.
Good.
Like I'm listening and I'm ready with my response already as soon as we start talking.
Right.
But I was doing the same thing in my friendships. If there was a conflict, I wasn't hearing what they were saying. I was ready
Wow.
with my response. You're offended?
Yeah.
Yep, I got why you're offended. And I'm gonna tell you, and it's like, girl, you ain't even listening to anything they're saying. Like you haven't heard a
Right.
thing said. And as a matter of fact, what you
Mhm.
thought they were offended about is not even what they were offended about.
Right. Right.
So it all boils down to it. I think just in marriage in general, like we have to be healthy communicators. And I feel like even Jesus was a good communicator.
Yeah.
And we have
Mhm.
to take that from him. I cannot call myself a child of God um, and operate in something in marriage that God honors. If he
Mhm.
honors it, that means he got some weight on it.
Mm.
Like
Mhm.
you don't honor something and you're not willing to go to bat for it. So the
Mhm.
fact is that God goes to bat for marriage.
Mhm.
But God is not going to beat you over the head either.
Right.
He's not beat you over the head and try to make sure that no, you were in this marriage, you are going to do right. Telling your husband you are going, he got to
Right.
make a decision. You got to make a decision. It's the same thing with salvation. If I have to make a decision to confess with my mouth and believe in my heart that he is Lord,
Mhm.
like what makes you think that I don't have to confess with my mouth that my marriage will
Right.
prosper, that I have to believe in my heart that my marriage is going to,
Mhm.
what makes you think that I don't have to do that if the very basis
Yeah.
of my salvation is based on that? I have to make a
Mhm.
choice. If salvation is a
Mhm.
choice, so is my marriage. So is me
Mhm.
being a good person. So is me
Mhm.
communicating well.
Yeah.
And I think that's where
Right.
we get it lost, like that marriage is ministry. And there was a certain
Mhm.
way you handle ministry. When I
Mhm.
stopped looking at my husband like he was the enemy, it was a lot
Mm.
it was a lot
Mhm.
easier when I started to realize, okay, this man is not trying to hurt me. And I
Mhm.
feel like that is what we talked about when how when to walk away and when to kind of be like,
Yeah.
okay, this is down or whatever, is if at any point I cannot say that my husband's not the enemy.
Mhm.
And I feel like you and I talked about, red flags and things that are going, like God is not going to leave you out here just to leave you out here.
For sure.
He's not just going to be like, well, he is in a marriage. All right, whatever. I'm gonna
Mhm.
just let her ride it out, Kia. Like he's not gonna keep telling you
Mhm.
that. I think you and I talked about earlier. Like he's not gonna keep doing that. He's not gonna
Mhm.
be like, what? You praying, Lord help me? He's like, you do it.
Mhm.
Like, you make a decision, whatever that
Mhm.
decision is. You know what I mean? And I think that's just a part of it. Like
Well,
that.
I like
Go
I
ahead.
was gonna say our life, what you just said is so profound because our life is a choice. The
Everything.
Bible talks about, God setting before us good and evil, right? And he said, I would that you would choose, right? I would
Right.
that you would choose. But at the end of the day, that's why we have free will. Even sometimes the marriages that we get ourselves into, because we get ourselves into the marriage and
Yeah.
they weren't God ordained marriage. They were because you was being hot, you
Right.
was, out here trying to prove some point or whatever plethora of reasons, that people get married when it's not a God ordained marriage. Those are choices too that we make.
Yeah.
And it's so important to realize that what are you going to choose? You know what I'm saying? It's just like you
What's the
just said,
choice?
it's just like salvation, like are you going to be hot and cold? Like one day is oh yeah,
Yeah.
one day I'm riding for it, the next day I'm not riding for it, one day I'm here, I'm that. It's all of those things that can wear down, because you
Absolutely.
can have one person that's choosing and the other person, like we said before, that's not choosing.
That's
And
not
so
choosing.
it's
It's
never going to work when the two people are at opposite sides, unless somehow God intervenes. And I am a firm believer that God can intervene and God can fix even marriages that are broken or whatever the case may be,
yeah.
but it has to be his will, and the two people have to come in alignment
Yeah.
too with
The will.
this is how it's going to
Yeah.
go. And
Because
the
the
truth of the matter also is sometimes, and one of my aunts said this to me. She said, Nikia, honestly, also, the truth of the matter is sometimes the God's will is that you're not supposed to be with that person. And
and that
that could
sometimes
be,
it is. Yeah.
yeah.
And I think
And I know
that's
that's
the
hard to
reality of
say,
it.
especially in
It's
church.
hard to say. It's hard to say. It's hard to say because, and I think sometimes this we could talk for a whole nother 2 hours about this because I think
Right.
sometimes we over spiritualize marriage too.
Mm-hmm.
We over spiritualize the idea of marriage. That
Mm-hmm.
uh because the Bible explicitly says he that finds
Mm-hmm.
a wife. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he has a choice. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a lot of them out here. He finds a wife. It doesn't say he that finds his wife. It said he that finds a wife. There's a
Mm-hmm.
choice in it. And I think
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we over spiritualize it, like God's gonna have everything's not gonna be this Adam and Eve kind of thing. God
Mm-hmm.
gonna put Adam to sleep and then he gonna take his rib and be like, her. Like, it ain't always gonna be that divine.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in doing that, sometimes we operate in everything in our marriage, all of that, we operate with this immature faith. And I think we talked about it
Wow.
earlier. And I'm like, it's this
Mm-hmm.
immature faith that doesn't realize that God will do what you can't do, not what you won't do. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
marriage is what I will do. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what I choose, if I'm gonna do it or if I'm not gonna do it. That's me.
Mm-hmm.
God steps in when it's
Mm-hmm.
stuff that I can't help, like stuff that's
Mm-hmm.
beyond my control, all of that. But I think
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we'll sit and pray, like you said. Sometimes it is God's will. That ain't the
Mm-hmm.
one I sent you to. Uh, but
Mm-hmm.
we'll stay because we're like, God, I'm expecting you to make this cup
Mm-hmm.
get up and walk. But it's like
Mm-hmm.
you still have a choice. You have a command. The Bible says, "Delight yourself
Mm-hmm.
in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart." And I always like
Wow.
to take that scripture in its context, though. If I
Mm-hmm.
delight myself in the Lord, He will give my heart what to desire.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Difference in that. There's a difference in that.
There's a big
Like,
difference because sometimes we desire things that are outside of the will of God, and
yeah, because I
sometimes
think when we
we
said
are
that
praying.
scripture
I had
growing up, we
I had
always
a
said it like,
conversation.
he's gonna give me the desires of my heart. No, he's gonna give me the
Right,
desires of my
right.
heart. As in, like,
And
he's
it's
gonna
in,
give my heart what
right.
to desire.
Yeah, and it's in prayer and in seeking him is where we find out what is his will
What is his
for my
will
life.
for my
And
life?
sometimes, we get into situations where we praying, but you talked about it in communication with friendships. We praying, but we don't really want to hear what God's saying. Like,
Mm-mm,
when you was dating that person, God was like,
nope, nope,
but
nope.
you was like, I'm praying,
Mhm.
but was you really praying? Like, you was just saying what you wanted to say, but you wasn't really listening to the voice of God. And
The voice
so,
of God. And I think that's
I
what it
love
all boils
the
down to. I think that's what
mm-hmm,
it all boils down to in marriages, friendships, life, people as general. Like, if we would submit ourselves to the will of the Father,
wow.
a lot of our wrestling and a lot of our
Mm-hmm,
tension in life would disappear. It wouldn't be a question
mm-hmm.
about it because we would be so in tune with the Father that, like, I don't have to ask if God is telling me this. I know what he's saying.
Wow.
But I think
Mm-hmm.
because as a whole, as a people, we are not committed to the Father, it's
Yeah.
hard. It's hard for us to even understand when it's time to leave.
Mm-hmm,
Because you think about it, in the
mm-hmm.
Bible, there were not many times where if God spoke, they acted like they didn't hear him. It wasn't too many
Mm-hmm.
times that he spoke that it was going to be like, well, God, did you say it wasn't it? Like, that wasn't happening. But I feel like
Mm-hmm.
now, because there's so much stuff, there's so many distractions, there's so many other things, like, it's hard for us to block out what everyone else is saying and, okay, God, what is it
Mm-hmm.
that you're saying to me? And that goes back to my marriage. There are times that I literally block out everyone. I
Wow.
don't ask advice from anyone. Bishop Hilliard said,
Mm.
once I consult with God, no, it was once I hear from God, I consult with man no more. And
Wow.
that thing wrecked me because I'm like, I think a lot
Wow.
of times you have got to block out what everyone else is saying. That's even inside of marriage. I got to block out what everybody else is saying. God, what are you trying to say to me? What are you
Mm-hmm.
trying to say to me as a wife? What am I supposed to be doing? And I feel
Mm-hmm.
like that's when the scripture should be applicable. A sanctified woman sanctifies her husband. Like, that's when it's
Right.
applicable because I am so before the Father. There's nothing I will do in my marriage that will go against the will of the Father.
Mm-hmm.
That there's nothing I will
That's
do in my
good.
marriage. I'm so intentional about doing what he said. And I think if we all
Mm-hmm.
got to a place in our personal lives with that, marriages would be able to flourish because you'd have two people
Right.
that are in tune with the Father. But it happens
Mm-hmm.
like when we get off. You know what I mean? Like when we get little, like, wait a minute. I don't know what you said, Lord. All right, let's stop what we're doing and let's do this. Like Kendall and I will
Mm-hmm.
absolutely, when we have things come up in our marriage, because there was a time recently where I was very cranky. Like, and it seemed like I had a
Mm-hmm.
short fuse with everything. And
Mm-hmm.
I shared this with you. Long story short, we came to realize that I had thyroid issues, which,
Mm-hmm.
of course, a part of thyroid issues is you are irritable. There was
Mm-hmm.
something wrong with my body that I didn't even know was wrong with my body.
Wow.
But once we settled and said, okay, God, what is it? Literally, from the time we prayed
Mm.
it, I had blood work like the next week. And then
Right.
it started to make sense why I was so irritable. But
Yeah.
I'm like, but if you're not in tune with the Father, like, you're gonna miss a lot. And we have to be honest about where we are. Even in our marriage, like,
Mm-hmm.
we got to be honest about where we are. I think you talked about it. You were like, yeah, I needed to go. That's just the
Mm-hmm.
reality of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's where you were. Sometimes that is his will.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to be honest about where we are. And if we're not honest, nothing will ever work. Our marriages, our friendships, nothing is going to work because God is not going to be able to talk to us beyond ourselves.
Yeah. I love that. I love that part that you're saying. Yeah, I love that part that you're saying about being honest with ourselves about where we are, right? And now me being on this side of it, back into this single, whatever you call the people that was married and not, because I'd be like, I'm single, but like I've been married, so it's like
I've been married, so like I'm kind of single.
I don't know what that's called. We need a name for it. Single again, we need a name for it. But also realizing too the value of my relationship with God, right? And being able to be okay with God's no, to say, that's not it. And not bucking against and being like, but I need somebody because I don't want to be alone because I'm 40 and I feel like whatever, is being able to be settled in my spirit to say when is the right time, when it is the person that God has for me. It's going to happen the way God wants it to happen and when he wants it to happen. But in the meantime, I don't just stop my life. Like I'm out here doing what I need to do. I'm out here building, developing, growing my relationship with God, building, developing, growing my personal self, being like you talked about, self examining my own self to see, okay, what areas do I need to still grow, develop, and change so that the next time around I won't make the same mistakes. The next time around, I'll be able to hear God very clearly. I think going into a marriage where you are both, because it's one thing to say, oh, this person know God, because they go to church. But it's a lot of people that go to church that's not in relationship with God. And so just understand. They don't know that man. Understanding that is now a priority for me. Because a man that cannot submit to God, how is he gonna lead me? Like you can't even submit to God. Like it's a no for me. No, this has been go ahead.
I was gonna say it goes along the same lines of like so much, because I think it's just important. Like the bottom line is you genuinely have to be at a place where you know where you are in God. And me being married is different because I'm like, I've spent most of my adult life married. So for me, it's different because I didn't experience that, having to chase after God for yourself entirely. It was only a few short years. And then I was married. So then it was, I have to consult the Lord, but I also have to honor my husband. So it's always been a juggle for me. So I always tell single people that whether you're single again or single the first time, like whatever it is, I'm like, you have an opportunity to have uninterrupted time with God. I don't have that opportunity. Because there are some things that even if God tells me, I still have to bring it to my husband.
Right.
It still has to do another pass through.
Right.
Beyond what he said to me, I still got to pass it through him. So I'm like, don't look on those moments. That's just encouragement to you. Like you have an opportunity wide open to have uninterrupted time with God. And that's not a bad place to be in at all.
Absolutely. Because this uninterrupted time with God is going to prepare me to be the wife that I'm supposed to be to the man that he's going to send to me. I love that. Man, this has been so bomb. I love it. I want you to just close us out. I know this is I Am Not My Divorce. And we're on here to just encourage those that have gone through this process so that they know that they're still worthy of love, that God
Mhm.
still sees them, that there's still value in them, and that God is a God of second chances. Maybe you've been
Yeah.
divorced multiple times. So God is whatever chance you need him to be in this time in your life. In
Yeah.
this time of your
Yeah.
life. But my this is my heart to know that, sometimes we do have to make difficult decisions for lots of different reasons. Some we're able to articulate out loud, some we're not. But God, my mom used to say it to us growing up all the time, that God sees all and he knows all. And there may be things that you cannot say to man, you can't utter to man, but God knows. So if you could just close us out, however you feel led to close us out on tonight, and we'll be done.
Yes. So, like you said, you are anyone that has been divorced, you are worthy of love. And the one thought I will leave with you is that I want you to carry this with you forever and ever and ever, is that God wastes nothing. There is nothing
Mm,
that God has created, nothing that God has done, not anything that God has allowed to happen that he will not use for his glory. Period. And a lot of times that looks ugly.
yeah.
That's whether it's divorce, whether it's I'm just in a place where I can't hear God, whether it's a place that I've lost a lot. Um,
Mm-hmm.
God still uses that because we have the privilege of serving a God who creates something out of nothing all the time. So if I have
Mm-hmm.
nothing, if you feel like you have nothing, that's actually a perfect
Mm-hmm.
opportunity for God to do what he
Mm-hmm.
does because he works best with nothing. Every
Yeah.
miracle that we've seen God perform, it was with nothing,
Mm-hmm.
and he did something. So never think that having nothing is a bad place, because it's always an
Mm-hmm.
opportunity for God to do his thing. Um, and he will not leave you or forsake you. He will not give you desires and then dangle them in your face. Um,
Wow. Mm-hmm.
I think that sometimes when we don't get what we're asking from God, that's a lot of times how we feel like that God is playing with us. Um,
Wow.
and he's not. He's not. It's just that God has an eagle's eye view of your life,
Mm-hmm.
and we can't see that far up. We can't see that far
Mm-hmm.
out. We can't see that far wide. So don't take out your disappointment
Mm-hmm.
on God,
Mm-hmm.
because again, he's never going to give you something and not be able to produce something from
Wow.
it. Every
So good.
seed is a seed. And
Yeah.
sometimes when we're planting, as you are a seed, and sometimes in those dark seasons, I often think about a seed. And a lot of times we spend a lot of time talking about the harvest. And I'll be finished after I say this. A lot of times we spend time talking about the harvest, but we don't spend time talking about what that seed experiences. Um,
Mm-hmm.
that seed gets buried in complete
Wow.
darkness. Like
So good.
there is nothing that, like, it sees no light.
Mm-hmm.
It can't really testify to what's happening around it. All
Mm.
it knows is that it is getting the nutrients that it needs.
Mm-hmm.
That's all that seed has to go on. And a lot of times in our lives, I think we are that seed where we're
Yeah,
buried
for sure.
in the dirt,
Mm-hmm.
the dirt.
Mm-hmm.
And that dirt isn't always, even if you're talking about farming, that dirt isn't just dirt. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
dirt, it's waste. Um, it's it's like yucky. But
Mm-hmm.
once that seed goes into the ground, it's covered.
Yeah, that's
It's
good.
covered. And I think a lot of times we forget that even as a seed, I'm covered. It's when the
Yeah.
harvest comes that I got to fight for it, that I have
Yeah.
to talk about, I have to protect myself from the birds, that are flying, the animals that are creeping. But while I'm a seed,
Yeah.
I'm covered.
Man, that's so good.
And I think that's important. So if anyone that is on here that is going through, you're single, you're not married, or you've been through a bad relationship, because sometimes relationships breakups can feel just like divorce.
Yeah.
So just remember that although this is a dark season, you're still a seed and you're covered. And when it's time for you to break through out of this, you'll have gained enough that you'll have enough footing to grow. And that's the part that I want you to remember.
So good. So good. Oh, I love that so much. I'm a seed and I'm covered. I love that so much. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming on tonight. I'm so appreciative to everyone who has joined in. I saw some comments popping on, so I'll be sure to go back to read those comments. But I thank you so much for everyone for taking this opportunity to be on this chat with my girl Alyssa Cartwright Banks. If you have not, head on over to her page and check out her fly gear on the Sanctified Chick. Okay.
Yes.
Again, I love you guys for being on tonight. And we will see you the next time. Have a great night.